Week 26, Overview, Ulysses Grant and the Plains-Indian Wars. This week, we'll look at the two administrations of President Ulysses S. Grant. During Grant's terms in office, federal troops fought several decisive battles with Native American tribes, including Custer's last stand at the Battle of the Little Bighorn in Montana. We're going to cover all of the Plains-Indian Wars this week, even though they didn't all occur during Grant's administration. We've seen quite a bit of Ulysses S. Grant over the last 3 weeks as we worked our way through the Civil War. Grant took over from Andrew Johnson, whose relationship with the radical Republicans in Congress ranged from strained to hostile. Johnson was one of 2 presidents to be impeached, although, like Bill Clinton, he wasn't convicted. Grant got a fresh start, but he soon rubbed his fellow Republicans the wrong way. As a war hero, he had no prior political experience. Being president does not lend itself to on-the-job training. He took office pointedly noting that he wasn't beholden to the Republican Party, and he staffed his administration with friends, relatives, and Army officers. He didn't ask Congress for suggestions about who he should pick for his cabinet, and Republican leaders resented that. Grant had come into office 4 years after the Reconstruction of the South had begun. From 1864 to 1874, Republicans dominated Congress. During this time, federal troops occupied portions of the South. Many Southerners resisted federal directives to allow blacks equal protection of the laws and the right to vote, while Northerners became preoccupied with their own problems and lost interest in keeping troops to enforce the laws in the South. The problem was Reconstruction was hard work, and America has always had trouble maintaining the political will to stick with something hard. By the end of Grant's first term, Republicans had become disgusted with the widespread corruption in government at both the state and federal levels, and they were increasingly disheartened by the ongoing violence of the KKK and the white leagues that frightened black voters away from the polls. Simply put, ongoing Southern white resistance to federal forces, along with disillusionment with the corruption of government leaders at many levels, led to a significant loss of support of Northerners in the Reconstruction process. They had won the war, but Republicans slowly gave up on winning the peace. Grant still wanted to carry on with Reconstruction, however. He was reelected in 1872, even though some discontented Republicans formed a splinter party and ran a candidate against him. The Democrats, meanwhile, saw their opportunity to reclaim political power. As more and more Southern states rejoined the Union, whites regained control over who represented them in Congress. There was an economic panic in 1873 that led to quick-fix legislation by Congress, which Grant vetoed. America didn't like that, and Democrats swept into the majority in Congress in the midterm elections of 1874. Grant was more or less a lame duck for the last 2 years in office. The Democrats promptly launched a series of investigations into Grant's administration, which turned up a lot of dirt. Although Grant himself was not corrupt, many of his political appointees had taken personal advantage of their positions of power. Grant's political problems helped end America's commitment to Reconstruction. By the end of his second term, the country was pretty much ready to move on. The disputed presidential election of 1876 killed Reconstruction completely. Rutherford B. Hayes was chosen for president in an otherwise deadlocked election because he promised to pull all federal troops out of the South if he got the job. That wraps up the South for now. So let's take a look at the American West. We're entering the brief era of the Wild West, when cowboys and Indians galloped over the vast plains. When the United States started pushing Native Americans out of their native lands in the 1830s, they promised them the Indian country, for, quote, as long as the rivers shall run and the grass shall grow, close quote. The Indian country included almost all the land between the Missouri River and the Continental Divide, a vast but arid region. Those treaties lasted as long as the land seemed worthless to farmers, but when whites discovered gold and silver there, the rush was on to squeeze the Indians onto ever smaller reservations. Gold wasn't the only thing that brought settlers west, though. There was a whole new world of opportunity out there. Take, for example, cattle drives. The new railroads and modern meatpacking plants made it possible to ship western beef back east, which created a whole new kind of cattle rearing. Cows were allowed to roam wild in the West after being marked with the brands of their owners. In the spring, men on horses rounded them up, branded the new calves, sorted them out, and then drove a part of the herd across hundreds of miles of open country to the nearest railhead. Abilene, Wichita, and Dodge City boomed as they became major centers for this new industry. The cowboys who did all this work had hard and dangerous jobs. Their wild and lonely lives turned into icons of the American West. Folks back east got a taste of life on the frontier by watching Buffalo Bill's Wild West a traveling road show that included a mock battle with Indians that fascinated Americans and Europeans alike. Buffalo Bill performed before Queen Victoria and Pope Leo XIII. Not bad for a boy who grew up on the prairies, rode for the Pony Express, and made his living hunting buffalo for the workers on the Transcontinental Railroad. Dialectic students are learning about that this week. Movie makers in the 1930s and 40s churned out countless epics of noble cowboys fighting evil Injuns. In reality, cowboys didn't usually fight the Native Americans. Not that there wasn't fighting, it's just that it was the U.S. Army that fought the Plains Indians Wars. Most historians date the close of these conflicts to December 1890, when the massacre at Wounded Knee crushed any lingering hopes of the Native American peoples. Unlike most of America's other wars, the Plains Indian Wars were a series of disconnected skirmishes and battles. Each Native American tribe is technically a nation of its own, although not a sovereign nation like the United States. The simplest way to learn about these wars may be to learn about the individual Indian chiefs who led their people in armed resistance. Quanah Parker was a Comanche leader who attempted to fight off the American Army in 1875. His mother was a white Texan named Cynthia Ann Parker, who married a Comanche chief. The Comanche traditionally lived on the southern plains from Oklahoma to New Mexico. The U.S. government signed a treaty with the Comanche that placed them on a small reservation in exchange for a government promise to stop the white buffalo hunters. When the government failed to protect the buffalo herds, the Comanche attacked the hunters themselves. The army swept in to force the Comanche back to their reservation. Quanah Parker led the Comanche warriors in resistance, but they couldn't defeat the U.S. Army. Parker and the rest of the Comanche were forced onto a reservation in Oklahoma in 1875. Another chief was Sitting Bull. He was a Sioux leader and holy man who encouraged his people to defend themselves from the white man. The Sioux people lived in the northern plains, from Minnesota to Montana. Sitting Bull's forces defeated cavalry leader George Custer and his men in 1876 at the Battle of the Little Bighorn.